Question number 3, Andrew Little.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Does he stand by all his answers during oral question number 2 yesterday?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, yes.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Andrew Little.
Is it an acceptable moral standard for the former Finance Minister to say on Radio New Zealand on the 1st of March 2016 that he was not aware of any specific problems between Mr Barclay and his former staff, when in fact he was aware that Todd Barclay had recorded Glenys Dixon?
The point of order. 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 Point of order, the Honourable.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Speaker's Rulings 1732, quite clear Prime Minister's got no responsibility for a member of the caucus ruling by your good self. And I suggest here that's exactly where we're going with this question.
I'll hear from Grant Robertson.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. 2 points to make. The first is that these matters were indeed traversed in question number 2 yesterday, hence why it is a supplementary question that Mr Little has asked. Secondly, the first words of Mr Little's question were about acceptable standards for ministers. The Prime Minister is responsible for that. He gave an illustrative example of a behaviour of a minister, and I believe that question is in order.
I'm going to invite the member to ask the question again. But my first inclination, as I heard the question, is that because it was referring to Prime Minister asking the Prime Minister a question as his former ministerial role as a Minister of Finance around radio comments, that the question is in order. The question can be asked again. I'll listen again very, very carefully and allow it to proceed if I determine it is indeed in order.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Is it an acceptable moral standard for the former Finance Minister to say on Radio New Zealand on the 1st of March 2016 that he was not aware of any specific problems between Mr Barclay and his former staff, when in fact he was aware that Todd Barclay had recorded Glenys Dixon?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Well, Mr Speaker, at the time the matter was under investigation, and in fact the facts of it had not been established, despite some of them covered by a confidential employment settlement to which I was not a party, and they were under investigation by the police. And at the time I was not sure what I could or couldn't say about that.
Supplementary.
Order. Supplementary question, Andrew Little.
When the Prime Minister said on Radio New Zealand on the 7th of March 2016 that he had, quotes, a bit of a discussion with Bill, did the former Finance Minister tell the then Prime Minister that Todd Barclay had been recording his staff's conversations?
A point of order.
Speaker, I think the issue here is that I accept that the opposition leader is dressing these questions up as the former Minister of Finance and so on. But what is quite clear is that the Prime Minister or the former Minister of Finance was answering these questions on radio as the former member for an electorate. He is not responsible, therefore, as Prime Minister or as former Minister of Finance for these matters. Quite clear in terms of standing orders and Speaker's rulings that he shouldn't be answering those, therefore, on a non-ministerial basis, or he shouldn't be speaking or answering questions about a member of the caucus.
Speaking to the point of order.
I'll hear from Grant Robertson.
Mr Speaker, I'm not sure if the Leader of the House heard the question correctly. The question asked about a statement the Prime Minister made. The current Prime Minister is responsible in this House for those questions. It was about something the Prime Minister said, and it is a legitimate topic for these questions to be asked.
And again, I'm going to ask the member to repeat the question. The question, as I understood it, is very much around ministerial responsibility. Mr Bridges raises the possibility that the question was answered in his capacity as a former member of that electorate. Possibly that case, but I doubt it. He's on Radio New Zealand, I would think, because he was then the Minister of Finance. The question can be asked again.
Thank
Order.
you, Mr Speaker.
Order. I've called Andrew Little to ask a supplementary question.
Mr Speaker, when the Prime Minister said on Radio New Zealand on the 7th of March 2016 that he had, quotes, a bit of a discussion with Bill, Did the former Finance Minister tell the then Prime Minister that Todd Barclay had been recording his staff's conversations?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, I'm sure I would have talked to the former Prime Minister about matters that were relevant to the management of the caucus, but I can't recall either the discussion or the content of it.
Entry.
Order. Order. Supplementary question. Andrew Little.
In light of that answer, and given that, according to the former Prime Minister, former Finance Minister Bill English, quotes, just said a couple of his former staff members had left, that was it, end quotes, is it acceptable that he covered up this incident from the Prime Minister?
Well, point of order. I come back to it.
Order. Point of order, the Honourable Simon.
Because now, Mr Speaker, what you've had is a reference to his former staff members. They were his staff members in his capacity as local Member of Parliament. Now, the Speaker's rulings are incredibly clear in regard to that he therefore they're not in a ministerial capacity and he's not responsible for what he did as a former member of electorate. So it's quite clear he does not have responsibility for that as Prime Minister of New Zealand.
Order. And on this occasion, I don't agree with the member. The question to me is about the actions of a former Minister of Finance talking to the then Prime Minister. That is in a prime ministerial capacity. The Prime Minister has responsibility. The question will be asked again by Andrew Little.
Mr Speaker, in light of his previous answer, and given that according to the former Prime Minister, former Finance Minister Bill English, quotes, just said a couple of his former staff members had left, that was it, end quotes, is it acceptable that he covered up this incident from the Prime Minister?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, allegations of a cover-up are ridiculous. The statements made to me regarding this were reported to the relevant party official, that's on the record, and then to the police. It's a weird world where the Labor Party says that reporting a matter to the police is a cover-up.
Supplementary.
Order. Order. Supplementary question, Andrew Little.
In light of that answer, and what the former Finance Minister knew throughout last year, and at times that another MP was making statements that, to his knowledge, were incorrect, did he not do anything to ensure that the law was properly observed?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Well, Mr Speaker, I participated in a police investigation, made a statement about the limited knowledge that I had. That is different. The police investigated. You'd have to talk to them about what they did, how they did it and what they established. That is a matter for them. And the same matters were actually canvassed. The same matters were canvassed extensively in the media.
Order. Before I call the member, I don't want a continued interjection from Mr Grant Robertson. Andrew Little, supplementary question.
Speaker, is it an acceptable standard for a minister to be aware that a public figure is lying and to cover that up for 18 months?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Well, Mr Speaker, simply don't accept the member's assertion.
Supplementary.
Order. Andrew Little, supplementary question.
Given his statement yesterday that it would not be acceptable behaviour to illegally record a staff member, and his police statement that Todd Barclay did record Glenys Dixon, is it the Prime Minister's view that Todd Barclay acted illegally?
Order. No, that question is definitely out of order. The Prime Minister doesn't have a Prime Ministerial responsibility for a member of caucus.
Supplementary, Mr Speaker.
Further supplementary, Andrew Little.
Why did a member of his office tell several journalists yesterday that what Glenys Dixon had told police didn't stack up, when his own police statement shows her account does stack up?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, I have no knowledge of that particular assertion, but the police had many months of investigation of these matters, and the member is free to ask them what they thought about it. I answered the questions I was asked by the police.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Andrew Little.
Is he aware of whether former Finance Minister Bill English requested that police withhold his police statement from the Official Information Act responses about the Todd Barclay investigation?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Well, Mr Speaker, I understand there has been an Official Information Act process. I was aware of it, didn't really take part in it. My statement is in the public arena, and I think contradicts directly the member's assertion of a cover-up. I answered the questions to the police with the knowledge that I had.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Andrew Little.
Given the police statement that quotes...
Order. Order. Well, again, please less interjection from one particular quarter. Andrew Little to start the question again.
Speaker. Given the police statement that quotes, police consulted those individuals who provided statements as part of the investigation, the redacted file that was released took into account the view of the individuals consulted. Why did he ask for his police statement to be withheld?
Point of order.
Mr. Speaker, I appreciate we've discussed this issue now in points of order, but what we've got here is questioning about a police statement that was made by a former electorate member of parliament. It has to have been, because it is as the electorate member of parliament that the Prime Minister had the information in the statement. It is quite clear in those standing orders and the rulings that I've outlined to you earlier that in that regard, therefore, he is not responsible for them and shouldn't be answering as Prime Minister.
Order. I will hear from Grant Robertson.
Mr Speaker, I was speaking to the point of order. The police statement specifically identifies Mr English as the Minister of Finance. The police statement was given as the Minister of Finance.
Order. No. I'm not convinced by the point raised by Grant Robertson. I'm going to ask for the question to be repeated, or I invite the member to change the question. As I listened to it a second time, I suspect on this occasion the Honourable Simon Bridges is absolutely right in that the police statement would not have been given in an official prime ministerial or ministerial statement. I will listen carefully to the question, but unless it's changed, it's unlikely to meet the test of my allowing it to be proceeded.
Point of order, Mr Speaker.
I will hear from Grant Robertson.
Mr Speaker, there are 2 points I want to make. The first is that yesterday we had a number of discussions and questions around the police statement. The Minister has answered questions around the police statement just now, just moments ago. He contested Mr Little's view about the police statement. And I reiterate, he identified himself in that police statement as the Minister of Finance. It is a legitimate question, if only as a follow-up to previous supplementaries, for Mr Little to be able to ask that question today.
The Honourable Simon
I
Bridges.
think the difference, Mr Speaker, is that right now what we have from the leaders of the opposition is questions in regard to the information in that statement. And that information only came to the Prime Minister, not as Prime Minister, but as the former Member of Parliament for Clutha Southland.
No, I need no further assistance. It's time to move forward. The clerk has now handed me actually a copy of the statement, and in it Mr English has asked what his occupation is, and he says he is a Member of Parliament and the Minister of Finance. That doesn't mean to say that he continues to make a statement in a ministerial capacity. If the member wishes to change his question, that would be the wisest way forward, but if he wants to place it again and let me make a very definitive decision, I give him that option.
Point of order.
Point of order.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I don't want to appear to be relitigating, but there is an additional point, sir, and that is that the decision to withhold the statement was the police's. And the question is whether they would take more notice of the view of the Prime Minister. It is a matter of whether the questioning... Well, the Prime Minister interjects, but it is a matter... Sir, there's really 2 points. One, whether or not the police would take more notice of the Prime Minister's request than any individual's request. The second point is whether any ministerial staff whatsoever were involved in the communication. Because if they were involved in the communication, it then squarely has to be answered.
No, I don't need any further assistance, and that doesn't really help the position at all. Whether the police would be more influenced by a Prime Minister or somebody else, I have no idea. That's over to the police. Further supplementary, Andrew.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. In light of the most recent answer the Prime Minister has just given, and given the police statement that quotes, police consulted those individuals who provided statements as part of the investigation, the redacted file that was released took into account the view of the individuals consulted. Does he accept that it is acceptable ministerial conduct that he requests his police statement to be withheld?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, I'm sure that all discussions were conducted consistent with the Official Information Act, and the police in the end have statutory independence, but in addition to that, like any other agency, they make the decisions about what information they release, taking into account whatever factors they think are relevant.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Andrew Little.
Why should New Zealanders place any trust in him as Prime Minister, given he has told media things that are untrue about his contact with Glenys Dixon, told media things that are untrue about his knowledge of Todd Barclay's actions, and consistently failed the moral standards that New Zealanders expect of their elected leaders?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Now, Mr Speaker, I simply disagree. I respected the confidentiality of the original discussions had to be respected. It would be a breach of the law to breach those. Then it was a matter that was subject to police investigation, and I participated in that investigation.
Order. Question number 4. Right Honourable Winston Peters.
Mr Speaker, this question